Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of the Trail Encounters. We're really excited to have you here with us. And as we're kind of getting to do this more and more, hopefully we are hitting some questions that you've been thinking about, or maybe something that you've never really even thought about before. So last time we talked about faith and science, and it was really a fun episode, I thought.
It was very fun.
And today we're going to talk about creation, specifically Genesis 1:1. But before we do that, please like and subscribe and tell people you know about what we're doing here, and hopefully we will help create new ideas for the generations to come.
Yeah, answer your questions. That's what we're here for. So if you have questions, you can go to our website, purpose-press.com. There's a little contact us form. Just put your question in there, and we'd love to hear from you and maybe some things that's on your mind and on your heart that maybe we can just at least have a conversation about. That's kind of our intention.
Right.
So Genesis 1, why start there? Well, it's the first chapter of the Bible. That's a good start. But it's also has a lot of controversy surrounding it in the theological world, in the scientific world, between the scientific world and the theological world. Over the years, I've heard a lot of questions about Genesis 1. And so we're going to kind of delve into that a little bit today. But before we do, I want to kind of level set us, if you will, all right? One of the things you hear a lot from folks is they want to take the Bible literally. And I agree with that. However, when we say to take something literally, we should take it as intended.
Which I think is really interesting because I don't think anybody thinks that far. Literally just means whatever, I guess you could say, but there is much more to it.
Yeah, so for example, I love my wife Stacy here, and if I was going to send her a love letter, I would not format it as a business letter. I wouldn't put her address at the top, to whom it may concern, best regards, Frank.
I'm grateful for that.
It probably wouldn't go over very well on Valentine's Day, right? So there's different kinds of literature for different intentions. So we don't read a parable, for example, the same way we read like law code in Leviticus. We don't read a psalm the same way that we read maybe a statement from Jesus in the Gospels or a letter from Paul. There's different genres in the Bible, and so we have to kind of look at them in their literary context. So to take it literally means to take it as intended. So when Solomon says in the Song of Songs that her neck was like a tower, well, I'm sure it wasn't that tall like a tower, but it was long and thin and slender. So we've got to have the wisdom to read the Bible in its literary context and kind of how it was intended. What questions were the author trying to answer?
Well, and I know for me, I guess I never really thought about that within the Bible itself that there would be so many different ones. You think that the Bible is one type.
Right. So yeah, you have 66 different books in the Protestant canon, different authors over centuries and centuries of writing. And so yeah, they're going to have different questions, different perspectives, ways of seeing the world that are different. And so because of that, we got to do the work to look at what they were trying to communicate. And Genesis 1 is one of those. Sometimes people come at this chapter in the book of Genesis and they want to know how God made the world. Like it was a literal 6 days, for example, or was this the order God did it in? How did this happen? And then science comes along and says, well, we think it happened differently, and the two become in conflict. My question, though, is what was the author's intention in writing Genesis 1?
Right.
Did he have a different agenda? Was he trying to answer different questions? Maybe his question wasn't how it was done, but was more interested in who did the creating, right?
And how do you find that?
So that's a great question too. So how do you know what the author intended? Well, we don't, right? However, we can look at what he wrote and kind of take off the lenses. What I mean by that is, if I go to read this book looking for how, I might miss what the author's trying to teach me. So I have to kind of step back and look at just Genesis 1 as it is and say, what is being communicated here? And without trying to bring my questions, my intentions to the letter or to the chapter, what is it saying to me, and how can I read it just as if it was by itself in a sense? Because Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a is kind of its own section. So let's read it like that. And that's what we're going to kind of do today and see if there's some lessons that the author is trying to teach us before we come at it with kind of our questions, our perspectives. So that's kind of where we want to start today in Genesis 1. Okay?
Sounds great.
Okay, so to do that, we're going to just have, I'm asking you, Stacy, since you have a beautiful voice, to read the first 5 verses, which kind of opens and sets the stage for what we're going to find in Genesis 1.
Okay. When God began to create the heaven and the earth being unformed and void, with darkness upon the face of the deep, and a wind of God sweeping over the surface of the water, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, a first day.
Okay, so there's a lot in these first 5 verses, and we can go on for a long, long time. So we're going to kind of hit the high points today. I'm working on an article right now about Genesis 1 that I'll let you know when it's out. That kind of goes into the details of this. What Stacy read is actually a translation I did a few years ago. And I had to make some decisions in that translation of how I was going to translate certain words. And part of that comes down to what is the image that the author's trying to create. So again, one of the things I think we find very early is that the author is interested in who. Who creates like this? In fact, in Romans chapter 1, Paul says, God's power and invisible nature is seen in what he has made. And I think that's kind of what's going on here. He's interested in who is it, what are the characteristics and the qualities and the personality almost of the creator who creates like this, okay? Mm-hmm. So we see at the very beginning almost an image of a chaotic scene.
Right.
It says that God arrives on the scene, that when God began creating, it was tohu vabohu in Hebrew, which is translated either formless and void or empty and void. And some people argue that that means that there was nothing. It was just complete blank slate. We call it ex nihilo, like out of nothing. That's one perspective. But when I read this word tovu is also translated in Isaiah as chaos. That the image I have here of, this chaotic scene with these waters all around, and there's a wind from God kind of hovering over the waters, the image I get is of a storm.
Wow. And storms, there's quite a few within the Bible itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So great. Yeah. Great example is in the Gospels, right? Mm-hmm. How many times did Jesus have to calm a storm in the Gospels? At least twice in Matthew, right? Where they're out there on this chaotic scene, it's all churned up, the disciples are afraid, and Jesus is like, "Stop." And it stops. So we see that here too, by the way. There's this chaotic scene, and God speaks. Mm-hmm. And when God speaks, creation responds. And that's the act of a sovereign. Now, what's super interesting to me is this idea of God speaking and creation happening was also carried forward in the Gospel of John. So if you read the Gospel of John, verse 1, it says, "In the beginning was the Word."
Oh, yes.
Right? The Greek word logos, which was this big kind of concept that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Mm-hmm. So this idea of Word is so powerful to me. So think about yourself, right? You have ideas in your head right now. Mm-hmm. Like Stacey, you're probably thinking, how cute I am.
I'm totally thinking that.
I'm just kidding. But the idea is that you may have that in your head, but when you speak words, those concepts that are in your head, which are not part of the reality, become part of the real world. Mm-hmm. It's amazing, right?
That is really interesting.
And your words change things. Mm-hmm. Like you can speak love into somebody, mm-hmm. or you can speak chaos and destruction. Lives are changed by our words.
It's so true.
And words have creative power. So in the beginning of Genesis, there's this chaos, and God speaks, and reality shifts and changes.
I
right?
love that.
The next thing happens is that God will separate, right here, in this case, light and darkness. He doesn't get rid of darkness, he just separates them. And I love this image too. So we have 3 wonderful kids, but when they were toddlers, a word I would use to describe them at times was chaos, right? They get kind of spun up about something, and what do?
Well, we would separate the chaos. We would just
Yeah.
put them in timeout and say, you all need to settle down for a bit.
Exactly. And that's the first step here. I think God is giving creation, in a sense, a timeout. Like, okay, enough. So one of the characteristics of God we see very early on in Genesis 1 is that God is a God of order, not chaos.
Right.
God is not capricious and just does kind of whatever he wants to do. God has order in mind. So once God separates them, God judges them. He says, that's good. And in fact, he judges every day but day 2. I don't know why he doesn't judge day 2, but every day he says, it is good. And we have a judge that is sovereign that can look at things from the outside and determine what justice is. So God not only defines what is good, God is good. It's who he is. And so therefore he can say, because I am good, I define what good is, that is good. So you have a judge that judges justly.
It also gives us an idea of what we should follow and look at as good.
Exactly, right. We have a single source to go to. There's no opinions on what is good when it comes to God. And then God names things, right? The light he called, and so we'll talk about that here in a little bit about this naming thing. But sovereigns name things. Like we name our kids because we are, for at least a time until they're teenagers, sovereign over them, right? So we name them. It was interesting in Genesis 2, God then gives Adam the ability to name the animals. Like God says, you're part of this. So you go and name the animals because you're sovereign over them. So you'll do what I did with all of creation and you'll name the animals. So that's a really powerful thing too. So again, we have this idea that God speaks and creation responds. God separates and creates order. God names and God judges. All in this very, very first section of Genesis 1. One more thing. Did you notice how the day is ordered in this first day?
It was evening and then morning.
Yeah, and that's kind of important
It's backwards, isn't it?
It seems backwards, right? Because I get up in the morning to start my day, right? But in Jewish thought, the day began when you can see 3 stars at dusk. That's the beginning of the day. And keep that in mind as we go throughout other texts. Like in the Gospels, when Jesus is crucified, his body is taken down before the Sabbath, which would be the evening of that Friday. Because that be the beginning of Saturday begins at dusk on Friday.
Right.
So it's that's something you kind of want to keep in mind, and it comes right here out of Genesis 1, and it still shapes how folks see the world to this very day. Okay, so that's day 1. Now, days 2 and 3 follow the same pattern. So in day 1, God separates light and darkness. But then on day 2, God separates the waters below from the waters above.
Right.
He pounds out, in Hebrew, rakia, this firmament we call it, or an expanse. Almost like he takes all this water, this chaotic mess. He's going to take it and say, you stay down here, and you go up here. Right? The sky's blue after all. And, if you think about it, there's water
rain
above,
that comes down.
rain that comes down, yeah. So water above, water below, it's separated out. Then on day 3, God takes the water on the bottom and says, enough of you. I'm going to pull you back and give you boundaries, and land's going to appear. Right? And so, like to this very day, 8,000 times a day, waves stop at a certain point on the beach. So again, this day is played out again and again and again when you go to the beach. So day 1, God separates light and darkness. Day 2, God separates waters above, water below. Day 3, God separates land and water. So all 3 days deal with separation, the stopping of chaos. Now, I'm going to ask Stacy to read day 4, and we'll see how day 4 continues the story, or does it reset the story?
God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for appointed times and for days and years. Let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth. And it was so. God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, a 4th day. I love that idea of the greater and lesser lights. It's so different than what we think of them.
Yeah, he doesn't call them sun and moon.
He hasn't named them yet, or?
Well, he doesn't name them, the idea of him naming things, he doesn't name these. Why? Because in the ancient Near East, they worshiped those things. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't say the sun and the moon. He says the greater light and the lesser light. It's almost like he's saying, yeah, the stuff you worship, yeah, I made those things. They're up there, the big one, the little one. And the idea of these things is to mark days, months, and years. They have a purpose. Mm-hmm. They work for God.
Right.
Okay, so that's really important. I'm glad you brought that up. Now, the other thing that's interesting about having the sun and moon to mark the days, months, and years, when was the first day mentioned? Well, on day one. But the sun wasn't around there to define it yet.
Which kind of leads into how you would look at this text, that if it was going to be how I did this step by step, there'd be a heck of a lot more information, I would think.
I would think so too. And maybe some of these inconsistencies, because that you're going at it from a different question. Mm-hmm. Now, let's look at what is actually being said here. So, in day one, God separates light and darkness. So where does the sun, moon, and stars exist? Well, in that world of light and darkness. They kind of now define it, right? So what was stopped on day one, light and darkness, and they're separated. Now God says, all right, I've stopped the chaos for you two. I want you guys to do these things now. So go back to our kids, right? You put them in timeout. We don't leave them there forever, right? You actually say, okay, now that you're calmed down, go clean your room. Right? Go do the dishes. Go finish your homework, whatever it is. So you want them to do what you want them to do. You needed to stop them first, but then get them
and
to
reset
move.
them into their purpose at that time.
Exactly. So light and darkness are separated, and now the sun, moon, and stars move into what God wants them to do of his purpose. So day 5 then, so let's go back. Day 2, we had separation of waters above, waters below.
Right.
So day 5, if we read day 5, God creates fish and birds. Who live in the
sea and the sky.
Exactly, right? So now what God stopped on day 2, he gets moving in day 5 and says, hey, I'm going to create these animals in the waters above and the waters below, so to speak, and I want you to be fruitful and multiply. That's what I want you to do. And then on day 6, we can almost guess what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. God separates out the land and the waters on day 3. Now on day 6, you get land animals, plants in vegetation, and humans. Right. And they are to be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth. So what's interesting to me, Stacy, is that this pattern, this parallel pattern, goes over all 3 days, right? So in a sense, you don't have 6 days, you have 3 days repeated, sort of. Right? So,
sort of,
yeah. So like day 1, 2, and 3 are paralleled with 4, 5, and 6. So there's 3 days that get then stopped, and then 3 more days that get them moving. Mm-hmm. That kind of makes sense. Yeah. So then that number 3 becomes really important. We'll see that throughout the rest of the Bible too. So again, 3 days God stops, 3 days God gets things moving. And then the 7th day is God's rest day, God's Sabbath. What's interesting is that the 7-day week doesn't fit into any lunar or solar calendars, which is why we have a leap year. Mm-hmm. So, but that number 7 then defines completeness. God rests and the whole thing is done. So think of it this way. Creation is 3 days, plus 3 days, plus a last day of rest. And so the point then seems to be, hey, we have a God who orders creation, who doesn't stand up for chaos. God wants order. A God who can judge the world justly. A God who can name things because he's sovereign and can evaluate things. And then, and here's the cool part, what does God do with all that? He says to the creation, be fruitful and multiply and subdue the earth.
So we get to be part of creation at that point.
Exactly. So it's not about information, it's about participation. So it's not just what happened at creation, but how you get to be part of it. God creates space for you to innovate and to invent and to participate in the world. Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful thing. That the creation story is an invitation to be creative ourselves. and that we have a God who orders the world, and in that ordering says, I'm inviting you to participate in this creation.
I love that. It shows just how much God loves his people. I mean, he's given us so much, so many good things to work with to create.
Exactly. And that's where science kind of connects here. So science asks different questions. The how question, like how did this happen? How did it begin? How did this, those kinds of things. How did the Grand Canyon get formed? Great, wonderful questions. And theology, the idea of Genesis 1 and science can come alongside because they're asking different questions, I think. So we can say, look, we can tell you about who made this. And science says, well, I want to go take a look at how. I'm kind of curious about that. And the two can talk together. They're not kind of in conflict with one another. Right. And so in a way, science is allowed to be inventive and innovative in the created order that God allowed to be created.
And the more that we learn with science, it's not if we learn something new about it, because, at one point we thought things were one thing, and then we find out more, like, with atoms and all that, we're able to do that. It's not going to cause us any consternation.
No, not at all. We're learning about the God who made these things and his fingerprints, right? We talk about, Fibonacci and last time and stuff like that. That's the beauty of it. The two can work together because the Creator gave us the space to do that. And that's a very powerful thing.
Yeah.
So the question for this week really is going to be what are you and I going to do to be creative? How are we going to use our time here to be innovative and to participate in what God's given us to do on today?
Love that.
All right, so next time, I think what we're going to do, Stacy, is look at another story from Genesis, because they're kind of fun, is the story of the Tower of Babel.
Ah, yes. One of my favorites. It
is, right? Because you get to see the big old tower, go into heaven. And again, another place where if we read it one way, we may be kind of like, well, they really want to get to heaven and knock on the door? Or is there another purpose behind the story that may give us more of a practical application for how we can live our lives today?
Well, and one of the things I really enjoy about that story is you being a historical linguistics guy, that the way that languages are separated at that point have some really interesting ways that show God at work.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's going to be a lot of fun to talk about, I think, next week.
Yeah, I think it will be too.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. And we would love to hear your questions so that we can answer them here. If you go to purpose-press.com, there's a little form that you can fill out and you can submit your questions. We'll contact you if you would like that. And it's going to be great. Well, and please like and subscribe.
Absolutely. And we'll see you next time right here on Trail Encounters. Thanks again.